FCO, NTDO 212, complex.
DPS, go. Inco, go. PUS, go. Surgeon, go. Booster, go. Copy that. We have a go from you guys.
This is Talking Sound.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome once again to the Talking Sound Podcast, the only podcast on the internet where negative 10 is a number to be desired, coming at you live from the throbbing heart of rock and roll that is Austin, Texas. I'm Chris Jordan, your host, and today on the podcast we have my good friend Daniel Moore, audio engineer from Austin, Texas, here in the house. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing okay.
Great. I have been trying to get you on for... Is it almost a year now?
At least 6 months, 8 months.
Close to. Well, I know you were there whenever I was actually building the website and getting it ready, and like, dude, you got to come on the show. You got to. But I've been pretty hardcore about getting you on for at least the last 6 months. Where every week or so, I drop you some kind of Facebook message or something, and like, hey, buddy, what are you doing? You want to get together, maybe have a drink and do a podcast? And you're just.
Sure, then I get a call.
Yeah. And, well, and it's the freelance life, you know. I mean, you make plans to live, and then lo and behold, somebody calls and wants to give you money. And like I say in every message response, I will not begrudge you that money. Go make your money, man. Like, I can't pay you to be on my podcast. If I could, I'd tell you to blow the gig off, and I'd tell you to come be on my podcast.
Yeah.
So it's great that for the last 6 months, you have been so entirely busy that you can't be on. And I mean, you know, life happens, all that kind of stuff too. But, what I really wanted to have you on about today was the life of a house engineer. The fun that comes about with being a house engineer, like personally, and the pains and woes of it. You know, there's a lot of people out there that... you know, I guess a lot of what I do with this show is explaining to people the different avenues that are available to them.
Yeah.
And house engineering isn't for everyone. Corporate AV isn't for everyone. You're actually someone who lives in the midriff between the two worlds.
Kind of do anything that anyone wants to call me and pay me money for audio-related things.
Absolutely.
Sometimes other things.
well, and that's just it. You know, I have come up with a new definition in life between musician and artist.
Yeah.
And musician is the true tradesman. He's the guy that is out teaching guitar whenever he can, taking on a student or two, playing jazz on a Wednesday night, 80s on a Thursday, country on a Saturday, you know, out of town. That kind of stuff, you know, a hired hand that'll come in and do anything. The artist is the dude that does that stuff, but it's all his own stuff, and someday it'll make it, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, I definitely know engineers that are artists as well, that are working on 85 different projects, and don't charge a penny for it.
Yeah.
But you're the true, kind of like me. You're out there in the trenches working it day in, day out, like you said, whatever gig comes along, whether it's a house engineering gig or a corporate AV gig.
Yeah. Corporate AV, theater, sound for film, studio recording. I mean, I started out with my background in studio production. I went to the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. They have a great media program there. And I think like everyone, when they're in school, they have this, you know, this idea, and then there's the disconnect of what you're actually going to do when you finish. And I ended up in Austin. I interned at a studio. Unfortunately, I graduated on Friday the 13th, 2008, on the eve of the recession. And so I landed in a new city full of bands, but no one had any money, and trying to get people into the studio and actually make a living. I mean, I love recording.
Absolutely.
I do miss being, you know, recording artists on the regular and the more creative aspects of the industry.
Sure.
But in the course of that time, I learned that there was a lot more work in live events.
Yeah.
And so that, you know, whether it's music, AV, theater, I mean, I kind of ended up on the path I'm on now just by, you know, just sheer luck and just trying to find where the work was at.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and you actually spent a little bit of time on the road as
Yeah,
well. You worked with the Warped Tour, stuff
I was on
like
the Warped
that.
Tour for a couple of years as well, and I also, you know, for a while was doing some A2 work with a production company called 11 Media.
Mm-hmm.
Great folks. And I was basically, they do a lot of streaming for web, archival film recording, and I was on the audio end of that. And so through them, I had, quite a few, one-off fly dates to various festivals across the U.S. and some local things as well.
Yeah.
And I haven't worked with them in a little while. The folks that I was working with, we just basically, they haven't had the demand. So they've gone, I think, in the more less festivals, more I guess traditional media. But great folks over there too.
Well, and that's really part of it, is getting out there and seeing what you enjoy. Because had somebody ever or had anybody ever mentioned corporate AV before you just landed on a corporate AV gig?
Not really. I mean, I knew it existed, but as far as, imagining myself going that direction as well, it just, was basically like, oh, I got some friends who run this company or, this staffing agency or labor company that are looking for people with skills in your area, you should give them a call. And, that's kind of how that route goes. But, the AV end of things is so different from the rest, I think, of the production industry in that it's a lot more customer service.
It is. It is. And I say that all the time. There's a lot more glad handing and just mere handling of clientele.
Yeah.
Like and some of it you experience in the studio. Whenever you're working one-on-one with a musician, whenever you're working with an artist or a group for an extended period of time, a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks in the studio while you're getting sessions done, you really do kind of have to kind of handle people and coax them into doing some certain things a certain way that are maybe outside of their norm. And that's a lot of what we do in the live AV field is handling the talent.
It's making sure that they're happy, that they understand the technology to a certain extent, and also making sure that you go above and beyond what is even possible sometimes.
And I mean, I recently did a response episode to the article that soundmen have been declared the grumpiest profession in the world. And I think a lot of it is because we have just a ton of knowledge crammed in there. Like, we are the live IT guy. Like the IT guy in the office. It's always like, come on, man, like, you didn't even put your command prompt right. Like that's a lot of it.
Well, and there, what was it? I think it was Carl Sagan who talked about the missing link between technology and people's understanding of technology and what's available and what's capable. And I think a lot of times when it comes to media, whether it's film, sound, lighting, whatever, people, see a production, but they don't really understand the technology or just the sheer physics or science behind what is actually possible.
And the logistics as well. The logistics that it takes to put on that kind of show. Because, I mean, you also worked for Atomic Picnic for a little stretch here in town as a production manager, things like that. So you truly understand the logistics that it takes to put a gig on, from planning the festival 8 and 9 months out to getting permits, everything else. And, that is a special talent. It is a special skill. Even being on a job site and being able to get 5 or 6 people and delegate things to people is a skill in and of itself. Not everybody can be a show lead, but a lot of people can be a stagehand.
Yeah. And I've taken more back to my original focus, which was being on the technical and creative end of things as well. I learned a lot from production and project management, and it's a great skill set. I often find myself trying to take the wheel in situations where I'm not necessarily in charge.
I can see that in myself a lot. I see myself doing that a lot, and a lot of times I actually have to be like, hey man, wouldn't you much rather just kick back for a little while and just let things happen? Like, it will happen, it'll get done. It's not your thing. Your name ain't, your hat is not hung on this gig. You're here to do a job, so just wait till it's time to do your job and do your job. And it can feel odd for those of us that are busybodies and want to progress things and get them done faster. It's hard for us to just sit back and let things coast.
Yeah, exactly.
And now, what are some of the challenges that you come up against regularly as a house engineer?
Challenges, communication is a big one.
Mhm.
That can be a struggle when it comes to either local musicians or touring acts, both of which come through the venues that I've worked at. And a lot of it is just, things like advancing, making sure input lists come across, making sure that the right people get the right information, and anyone who's a tour manager or is on the road is aware of those things, but oftentimes stuff gets hung up between various parties.
Yeah.
Because when you're advancing things or when you're trying to get information to folks where it matters, oftentimes it goes through a few people before it gets there. So, I'm very used to showing up on a gig at a club and not having any information. That's more or less 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, that's about 85% of the
And
time
so,
that you're going to have zero.
A lot of times, depending on what the situation is putting out fires right from the start. Now, depending on the personality of say the band has a guest engineer or they have a tour manager, or they're an up and coming band and they have none. They're doing their own merch. They're advancing shows themselves. It's making sure that there's an understanding and going into that situation with a positive attitude, because oftentimes these people come in, they've dealt with traffic, they've dealt with, weirdness in their payout the night before, etc. And so there's a lot of just being as friendly as possible in the situation. I've oftentimes had people come in and, I sent my advance, I sent this input list, I did this, and it's like, well, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I didn't get the advance. This is what we have. What can I do for you?
Amongst the game of telephone, my phone number was missed.
Yeah, exactly. Which, people don't consult the house engineer. It's very rare that they're going to, in an ideal world, I would have all the information for a show a week in advance and be able to show up and, but that's not really the case. So you really have to kind of fly by the seat of your pants and, just going in with a really constructive, positive attitude. You're dealing with all sorts of types of people, professional or beginners. And so you really have to, that's kind of the finessing, and I feel like that's, more so than your knowledge of things is your understanding of people and working with other folks to achieve a goal.
And that's exactly what my response to that article was. I really feel as though most sound guys probably suffer from like really horrifying Asperger's or something. Like they literally have it's like an Asperger's married with Tourette's.
Yeah.
It's like you have no idea how to not curse at people, how to not use like just angry, vehement language when dealing with people. And it is interpersonal skills. A lot of this industry is.
Yeah, and my life before doing sound, I made coffee, I worked in restaurants, I worked in retail. In order to stay employed in any of those fields, you really have to take the back seat oftentimes.
That's it.
And sort of put up with
just
bullshit.
Just smile and absolutely.
But yeah, as far as other challenges when it comes to being a house engineer, it seems like a little one, but artists not being on time. It's always
huge.
It's huge,
It's huge,
especially with a lot of local acts. They show up and they think, oh well, this is just it's just a local show, or I'm just the opener or whatever, and someone shows up 15 minutes before they're supposed to go on, and you have to get them line checked, and it's just, especially with bands that are just starting out or artists that are just starting out, they don't understand the
the changeover mentality.
Yeah, and also necessities, things that have to get done in order for you to go on.
Well, and I think the big, I noticed this the last South by gig that I worked, and I've gotten to the point I don't really run sound at South by anything like that. Here and there, once every couple years, the house of Miles Davis, the estate of Miles Davis will come in and put on a show with some up and coming acts, and I do some stage management for them, things like that. And I'm in charge of contacting all the bands like a month ahead of time, getting writers, getting, stage plots, that kind of stuff, so that it can be matriculated out to the right people. Logistics, infrastructure, project managing. But even to explain to them, you have an hour of stage time. That includes setup and teardown.
Yeah.
From the moment you step foot on stage, you have 1 hour. That is not an hour of performance time.
No.
If it takes you 20 minutes to set up, however long I'm going to assume 20 minutes to set up, 10 minutes to tear down, because I'm really good at what I do.
Yeah.
And that, the average. If it took you 2 hours to set up the show, it's going to be an hour out.
I mean, if it's yeah, exactly.
That's just the math.
But if it's South by, you're more dealing with, 20 minutes, from foot on the stage.
Oh,
till, you get your set change time, but oftentimes that's 10 or 15 minutes to get the previous band off, get the next band on, get them line checked, get them going,
unless you're blessed enough to have a shared backline all day or something like that, where people are literally just plugging in instruments to amplifiers.
Exactly.
But even then there's tuning, there's, setting up your own cymbals, your snare. Time gets eaten up.
Yeah.
And I think most people mistake that hour of stage time for an hour of performance.
They do. And so, and oftentimes I try and be as nice as possible. But, if a band is having issues technically with, say, a piece of gear, or they were running late, or this or that, there comes a time where I just have to say, hey, we're 10, 15 minutes into your set time. You guys are going to have to cut some songs. Now, barring the fact that there's technical issues that I'm responsible for. That's right. That's a different story. Now, if there's something that is going wrong on my end, I will not cut a band's set time if I can get away with it. Yeah. I will try and make that up with changeovers, with other factors. Yeah. I never want to limit an artist to what they're given because of something that's my fault. Exactly. And I've had that happen. I've had sparks blow out of the amplifier, like for the main speakers. Yeah. And it's like, hey guys, so we just lost mains, not subs. Yeah. But we lost our mains. Seems like the monitors are working all right. You mind if we just flip 2 of those around and everybody shares the drummer's monitor? Now that's definitely a worst case scenario. It is, man. And whenever you're standing there in the middle of mixing a band and you're like, is somebody lighting sparklers in my club covered in caramel? Oh, damn. Look at all those sparks by my feet. It's just spitting sparks out at you. It's like, I can't fix that, right? Like, I'm pretty good with a circuit. I'm pretty handy. Yeah. I can't fix that on the fly. The only solution was literally like, we lose 2 out of 3 monitors and just flip them on their sides so that horns are up. Yeah. Your vocals. So it was tough, but yeah, it happens. And those are the things that, like, you really don't want to mess up a band show. You don't want to take away from their time on stage. That's not what you're trying to do. And I feel like this is something that is lost on certain sound engineers. And I'm not going to name any names or anything, but the audience isn't there to see you. No. They're not there to see you do your job. No. In an ideal situation, you are as seamless and out of the picture as possible. That's right. They don't even know that you're doing your job. And so often I come across folks that, feel sadly like it's the other way around. And, it's your job in any technical production environment, whether it be you're a stagehand, you're a stage manager, you're a sound guy, you're a lighting designer, any of those things. Your job is to make the artist, whoever's performing, whoever's talking, feel as comfortable as possible to be able to put on the best performance that they can do. Yeah. And meanwhile, you're behind the scenes making sure that, you have a high fidelity experience. That's it. That's it. You have the truest form, representation of what this band sounds like. And, a good friend of mine, and this isn't his original saying, but, he says it a lot, which is good sound starts on stage. Yep. And so if you're dealing with a great band, you really don't have to do that much. You know, if they know how to tune their drums, they have the right gear, they have the right timbre, the right pedals, this and that. Sure. You really don't have to do that much. No, it makes your work so much easier. And at the same time,
I've always found the show starts with the monitor mix.
Oh, yeah.
Like if they aren't happy with what they're hearing on stage, they can give it. Most of the time, they could really care less about what's coming out of those speakers as long as they are happy with what they're hearing up there.
Exactly.
Like they trust you with what's happening with the speakers, but if they can't hear what's happening up there,
Yeah.
they like the mistrust goes through the roof and the performance goes to the basement like immediately.
Well, and you also, a lot of times working in the environment, the clubs that I've worked in are pretty small capacity rooms.
Yep.
So we're talking about bands that are either really, really, on their way up, that a lot of people really want to see. Local bands that either have a pretty big following or, not much at all. See a lot of, special showcases.
Yep.
And, a lot of reunions, a lot of legends that are back on the road doing, one-offs or short tours.
Yeah.
And so, in those situations, you're working with people of different skill levels. And so a lot of times in the newer, younger kids that are coming on stage, they don't know what to look for in their mix.
Yeah.
They don't know what they need, and
Yeah.
And I'm never going to give someone something that they don't ask for.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes one of the challenges is getting, musicians to say, I need this.
Yes. I can only help you if you help me help you.
And so it's,
tell me what you need and I will give it to you.
Exactly. And so it's it's still, it goes right back to communication, and there comes a point, if an artist is being disrespectful or they're not paying attention, you draw the line and you say, hey, okay, your set time's going. You didn't ask for this. Let me know in your set, and I always preface right before a band goes on, I always say, if you need anything else, let me know.
Yeah. Just talk
Raise
to me.
your hands, hand signals,
That's
those
it.
things. But yeah, and that as far as, a live production in a small club, the big thing is, stage volume that I deal with as well.
Yes. Absolutely. That to me is probably, I would say, the biggest issue.
Yeah.
Out of everything. Because you're now making it to where I can't do my job.
Exactly.
If you're so loud that like I can't give you any more guitar in your monitor. Like I can't work physics.
Yeah.
I can't make it appear like over the volume that's closer to you that you have control over.
Working,
and it's tough.
Working in small cap rooms, it's a lot. You have to take a lot of minimalist approach.
You
things,
do.
You have to make decisions that are important. You have to be really decisive on, where, what in your mix are you going to really highlight? What things
exactly?
What things do you even want to bother with miking? Like, for example, in a 500 cap room or less, I get folks that come in and want overheads on their drums. They want this and that and the other thing, and it's like, why don't you wait to put those up or see if you need those until you've actually heard the room?
Yeah.
Because I can guarantee that I can hear a crash cymbal outside of the club 15 feet away.
Yeah.
See,
one of my things that I always did that would blow people's minds, and I guess I'm just a really old school engineer when it comes to mixing, especially drums, kick snare overhead. That was it.
Yeah.
I will give you 3 mics, and if you can't hit those toms loud enough for the people to hear it in a 35, 50-foot deep club, you have a problem as a drummer.
Yeah.
Like, you have a real issue as a drummer if you can't hear your tom.
Yeah.
Like, I shouldn't have to use 8 of my 16 inputs on the board for your drums.
See, and I go a little overboard, I tend to shy away from overheads and
as long as you're doing just like racks and that's it. Like the cymbals will wash through that.
Oh, yeah.
It'll come through. But when people are like, "Oh, I need an over and an under mic on my snare drum," and I'm like, "We are not in a studio, man.
Yeah.
I know you like that, and it sounds epic, but you don't need it."
Well, and it also depends on the stage that you're on. I'm
True.
coming from the experience of doing a lot of smaller capacity rooms.
Yeah.
I've done big festivals and larger tours with bigger systems, but 9 times out of 10 on the regular during the week, I'm mixing in a room that's no bigger than 500 people.
Yeah, you don't need more than 5 mics on a drum kit. Like, it's ridiculous. Now, And, you're saying that you get used to prioritizing things in a mix, like you said. You get used to literally telling somebody, hey, listen, can we strip this out of the mix? Is it possible for that to bleed through? How many channels do you normally see on a small soundboard, in an average size room like what you're used to working?
How many are used or how many are available?
How many are available?
Depending on the day that the, inputs on the snake are working and certain things like that. I mean, clubs get wear and tear.
They do. They're
beat
used
up
day in, day out.
And the budget isn't always there to upkeep things as much as possible. And so, I would say I'm used to seeing around 20 to 24 inputs max at the very, very most.
Yep.
A band comes into a 500 cap room and wants, unless they're running Pro Tools or a bunch of
stem tracks, things
like that, there's no need to have more than 16 to 20 tracks coming to the stage, and that size difference.
Yeah, unless you've got like an insane horn section or something like that going on, where every instrument needs a mic.
But I would say on more regularly, I'm dealing with 12 to 16 channels. It's not a whole lot.
That's been my experience as well, is that most of the time you've got about 16 channels on a board. Most of the time you've got a 12-channel snake or an 8-channel snake, and some of those are for overflow, just in case something goes bad. Just patch over, keep rolling. But yeah, you really do have to learn to prioritize things in your mix, figure out where it's going to be, figure out where you're going to lie. What is your favorite soundboard to use?
Well, that's tricky because in my experience, I'm still gathering knowledge on a lot of higher end consoles. I haven't had a lot of experience on, things like the SC48 or PM5D or larger consoles. I'm more used to things like the M32, SI Compact, smaller consoles like that. So I wouldn't say I necessarily have a favorite. I think that it really comes down to the intuitiveness of the console itself. Yeah.
Well, and you're I guess just due to your age and when you went to school, you're probably a bit more prone to use a digital board than an analog most of the time.
Most of the time. I mean, when I was on Warped, we still had an all analog system.
That's beautiful.
We had a Midas Verona and all outboard rack gear, and I'm not sure if that's still the case, but with that particular stage, but it's a lot of push pull when it comes to digital or analog. You have to be prepared for any situation.
Yep.
And fortunately, with most digital consoles, there are subtle differences between how to find things you need really easily, like your EQs and your effects and your sends and all of that.
Yeah, your patching pads.
It's all relatively similar. There's a different way to find it on every console, unlike in the analog world where you could take a look at pretty much any board and say, okay, these are my sends, these are my returns.
This is routed this way.
Exactly. You just look at the board and you go, okay, cool.
Yeah. It's like reading a block map. That's going that way. Flowchart.
Exactly. But, in general, I really like the Avid boards on the higher end of things. Right. I really like Soundcraft, and I really like Midas.
What's your least favorite?
Oh, we were talking about this before we came on. least favorite console of all time in the digital world is the Studio Live.
Mm-hmm.
Studio Live was a great concept when it first came out. It was an affordable console that's digital, that, someone on a budget could get and be able to provide, an all-in-one solution.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when it comes to actual usability for those consoles and efficiency, they're so inefficient. Preamps aren't terrible, but the effects, and I'm a guy that likes to use a lot of effects.
They aren't nearly as good as the preamps and the PreSonus rack units.
Yeah.
Things like that. Like the PreSonus rack units have great preamps in them. And I don't know what happened to the ones in the live console. They are the most brittle sounding things in the world to me.
They're harsh, and things like like I just said, the effects. I'm a guy that
Yeah.
likes I use a lot of effects. When I mix.
Same here.
Whether it be
Well, it's your palette.
yeah, exactly.
It's your palette as an artist.
So and with the Studio Live, just it sounds, most of the effects on there sound like, you know, a children's like toy basically.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I was using that console recently, and I was mixing a band, and they had asked for a heavy amount of verb and some delay. So I wasn't really familiar with the console in that regard. I mean, I've used them
Mhm.
a lot for, you know, corporate events and AV.
Sure.
A lot of folks have those, and those do the job just fine. If you've got, you know, 3 folks on some wireless mics or something like that.
Yeah, you need to start getting in depth and so, like, personally for my flavor, I'd go Yamaha all
Yeah.
day long for a digital console. The LX9 to me is probably the bee's knees. Like, it is simple and easy to understand. All of your parameters that are on a normal channel strip are there.
Yeah.
They're marked as usual. The only difference is that jackassery of a friggin' mute light.
Yeah, it's true.
Where the light comes on when the channel is on
yeah.
instead of muted.
It's true.
The complete opposite of industry standard.
It's true. You go up the chain though, and I've actually had had some experience on the CL5 recently,
Yep.
and that console's fantastic.
Oh, it's
It's
amazing. I
as
mean,
far as-
the stuff that they were really one of the first digital consoles
Oh, yeah,
to
I
come
think
out.
in the late 80s was when the
And-
LS9 was
Yeah,
was developed.
and you know, just everything is right there in front of your face on that little screen, man.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing. You know, you get into the Studio Live stuff like that, and you
You got a box this big.
Oh yeah, no, you have an LED readout. You have an LED readout that's going to give you a few parameters like verb, things like that for your effects. But the real bitch bear of it is the friggin' EQ, dude.
Oh, you can't.
Whenever
you
you
can't
get
find
into
it.
the 31 band EQ and you have 16, like every one of the VUs for a channel becomes a band on the EQ. So once you get into a 31 band, you got about 15 left over there. And you got to remember how many you moved over and subtract from the end. And just the
It's-
math involved while you're in the middle of a show is like,
It's-
I
yeah.
hate you.
Fortunately, you can network those consoles now and
You
get an
can.
app, and
You
you
can.
can use the app, and
I
that
get-
makes it a lot easier.
well, and-
I'm a big fan of tablet mixing.
Tablet mixing is a great thing. You know,
Yeah.
you can walk around, get aspect on your room, that kind of stuff. I don't mind the tablet mixing. What I mind is when the tablet is necessary in order to properly use your equipment.
Yeah, and with the Studio Live, that's definitely the case.
And I have seen more than one, especially at corporate events, I have seen more than one engineer thrown under the bus
Yeah.
because of those things. You know, where it's like, why aren't you done ringing out the room yet? Have you ever sat behind this thing without the toy that goes with it?
Yeah.
Because without the toy, the thing's basically a $3,500 paperweight.
Yeah.
Like, you could do better with an old school Radio Shack mixer than you could with this thing
Yeah.
live. You know, it's trying to get in there and figure out the convolutions of the menu and how to get your EQs right. It's mind numbing.
Yeah.
And I don't know, to me, I'll always go analog every day. It's
Yeah.
a point to point thing. You know, I say the same thing about powered speakers. I love the concept. If they would just put in a bypass switch,
Yeah.
just just in case I could run it with an amp.
Yeah.
Just
I mean, I love analog equipment, especially in the studio, and
Yeah.
analog all the way. But you know, whether you like it or not, it is 2015.
it's a
and
digital world.
It's a digital
It's
world.
a digital world.
you
I have
know?
a thumb drive that has some presets on it, things like that I carry around with me to shows just in case.
Yeah.
And it's your best friend if you're a digital mixing engineer.
And you're gonna encounter that, especially if you're a touring engineer and you're on a club tour. You're going to deal with a different console almost every single night.
Exactly.
You know? And
Exactly.
so in that situation, you know, you have your show file. You can save your scene at soundcheck. You don't have to worry about, you know,
Yep.
certain aspects of analog mixing where you have to either, you know, draw your channel strip with where your faders and where everything we're at. We've all done that before. Or, you know, now,
Or you
again,
could
in
just
2015, you take
remember
a
it.
picture of it. Or you could just remember
You
it.
could
which,
remember your 38 channels of inputs.
I don't know about that.
I know. I'm just
As
playing.
someone who started doing as a patch guy, originally
I did-
and on stage.
I
you
didn't
know.
even see Pink Floyd's sound guy do that.
Yeah.
He brought out a book.
Yeah.
He brought out a channel
You
book
got a bit.
just to check that Neve. But I will tell you this: it was a Neve analog console that was running the wall show.
Yeah.
It was like, that's beautiful. I love seeing an analog console on a show this big. You know.
Well, something that was surprising recently here in Austin was the Levitation Festival that happened out at Carson
Yeah.
Creek.
How was that?
I didn't work it. I was an attendee.
How was it?
It was great. It was killer.
Fantastic.
It was a
That
great
was
festival.
Nomad that ran sound
Nomad
for them.
had all their gear out there. They had a lot of Nexus systems.
Dude, their new Nexo
Um,
system is phenomenal. It is
they're-
a beautiful sounding rig.
They're a fantastic company. Unfortunately, I've never contracted with them. I would love to get on board Nexo and Nomad.
I'll get you in touch with a couple people.
As far as a spectator, everything, I mean, it was a brilliant sounding show. They had all analog gear at every single stage, which was what I was getting to. A really refreshing part of that festival was just looking at the front of house, because you're at any show and you're a sound guy.
Oh God, you're gonna go geek out for a minute.
Take
You're
a
gonna-
look. But, you're
yeah.
not necessarily going to bug anybody.
No,
who's
but you're gonna
working.
peep it.
Yeah, just take and look and see what
Mhm.
they have, and it was actually, I was pretty surprised to see all analog setups, at least on two of the stages. The smaller stage, I didn't really see what they had running, but
I'm sure that Stefan Axel is actually their main guy at most of the big festivals that they do, stuff like that. I'm pretty sure he was running the main stage there as well. But he's a big fan of digital mixing. He really likes his digital board. So
Yeah.
I can just about guarantee that they would have at least the digital board on the main stage. Where, and the plus side is you can definitely dial in your scenes if you have bands that are showing up properly to get a sound check done
Yeah.
the day before, that kind of stuff. You can get things dialed in amazingly to
Yeah.
where it's just hit your recall, and then from there you're gonna make a few buttery changes. And for those things, I absolutely see the point of a digital console. Whenever
Yeah.
you're having like 20 bands on a stage in a day, and you have a chance to sound check with all of them prior to that, digital all day long,
yeah.
that kind of stuff is beautiful as far as changeover goes. Now, you were at Red 7 for a while.
I was there for almost 2 years.
Yeah, and unfortunately it has suffered the fate of many a Austin club here recently. I know Hole in the Wall is going through the same situation.
Holy Mountain closed recently. Hole in
Yeah.
the Wall's kind of up in the air, and Red 7 closed at the end of August.
Yeah.
We were fortunate that after the doors shuttered over there, that the owners of that club and some owners of another club here in town actually ended up merging.
Nice.
Um,
And that begat where you are now.
Yeah, which is the Sidewinder.
Okay,
which is
and
kind of-
how's that going? It's been
It's-
up for a couple months now.
Yeah, we've been open since the beginning of September. And so we've, been just kind of feeling things out.
Mhm.
Lots of, trial and error when it comes to, the system and how things are set up. And,
Sure.
we've got some, kind of hybrid setups there between what was existing at the Red Eyed Fly, which was the former club, and Red 7,
hmm
and some newer gear in there as well.
So
And-
the Red Eyed Fly was rolled into that as well.
Well, it's actually where
'Cause
Red Eyed Fly is at. So
Okay.
Sidewinder, Red Eyed Fly is now Sidewinder.
Okay,
So it's
okay,
the
because I
exact
knew
same-
that I knew that they had gone through some issues. Some friends of mine played there, and there was a new guy that was running the place, and but they hadn't changed over. It was still Red Eyed Fly,
Yeah.
and I heard something about them closing, and I guess that was it.
Yeah.
So-
So basically,
okay.
some of the partners in that club and the former partners of Red 7, basically they formed a merger and have opened this great new space that is really welcoming. They've done a lot of, as far as the venue goes, they've done some renovations and kind of streamlined some things a little
Good.
bit. It's kind of got like a, on the aesthetics end of things, it's kind of like a Southwestern feel in there. And,
Okay.
and rooms are smaller than Red 7 were, so I went from a club that was pretty small.
To a club that's small.
It's even smaller, and so.
Well, granted though, they have the outside venue, which is nice. Have they done anything? I assume the fact that they've done so is being right there next to the police department and everything, that they've done something to curtail the sound issues at night,
bit.
that kind of stuff.
A little bit. Our curfew isn't as late as it was at Red 7.
Yeah.
So shows start earlier, stuff like that, which a lot of clubs in Austin do. I know Mohawk is the same way. Stubbs, I'm pretty sure as well.
Yep.
Where you just have to have earlier shows.
Yeah, because
bring it inside.
Well, they have the outside venue, and especially Stubbs. It's right there near Red Eyed Fly. And Red Eyed Fly is literally like, if the wind was right, you could spit on the police's front doorstep.
No, I mean,
it's right there.
It's right there, and so, with Sidewinder taking over that space, it's, kind of the similar situation.
Yeah.
That's one of those things where it comes to, trial and error. Figure out how can we contain sound and how can we, we're in an outside stage, so there's some certain things that are unavoidable.
Yeah.
But, stuff like baffling on the stage, they added a lot of curtains and some stuff that has some absorption to it.
I did see some of that process starting. I guess it was in July whenever my friends came down and played. So it was right up around there. And I guess it was like a vampire party was going on at the time. So it was interesting. It was fun. They had an interesting time at the vampire party. But I'm really glad to see that you've landed in a new venue, that you've landed in a new home, and somewhere that is at least with familiar people that you've worked with before.
I've got, as far as the sound crew goes, there's some familiar faces. Same with the with the owners and a lot of the bar staff and club staff. There's a lot of people that came over and that are there, so it wasn't like starting over completely,
Yeah.
And Austin, the scene in Austin is not so large that you're not going to run across people on a regular
it's
basis.
pretty incestuous.
So
that's really the only way to put it. Like,
Austin's getting bigger, and the community, as far as production goes, is getting a little bit bigger. But in general, you're still going to run across the same faces.
Yeah, exactly.
People,
so like I said, I'm glad to see that you're busy. Back at it, doing things. We all of us freelancers experience a couple of lulls during the summer,
definitely, for sure.
And in the winter time, and I'm glad to see that we're both kind of clawing our way out of that.
Yeah.
So, on that note, everybody, please make sure to stop on by the new place, Sidewinder. The Sidewinder, right down on Red River, and 7th. Is it 7th?
It is. It's on Red River between 7th and 8th.
Okay.
Right across the street from Hoboken Pie. So, you can grab a slice of pizza. And
stop on by, support the new venue, support your old friends who used to run the Red Eyed Fly, the Red 7. Two very, very big clubs in town. Red Eyed Fly had been around for years.
Yeah.
I know. So stop on by, check them out, check out Daniel at some point. Where can they stop by to hear your work? You're in a new band, too, as a matter of fact.
I am in a new band, actually. We're called Lustron.
Okay.
And
what's Lustron all about?
Really,
because I saw the beach pants, and I'm all about the beach pants.
Really harsh noise. Lots of interesting time signatures. It's definitely not easy music to listen to.
All right.
But it's a lot of fun to perform and to play for sure.
Well, I look forward to hearing some of that. Where can people check that out? Do you have anything online?
We don't have a band camp yet, and we don't have any shows booked right now. We're we played our first show about a month ago. We're in the works of getting some recordings just kind of thrown together. So
hey man, it's all about just getting it out there, just having fun with it. And as soon as y'all have some stuff, please, even before you have some stuff, come be on the show.
Yeah.
Come by.
Yeah, we're actually looking to rent a space hereabouts. So
I'm in good with the people here, man. Let me know. Things are really, really affordable here at Austin Music Rooms. They're fantastic. On that note, everybody, while you're online trying to find Lustron, please stop on by TalkingSoundShow.com. That's the website. There you can find all of the articles, all of the technical episodes, all of the new music reviews. As a matter of fact, we just started a new audio only feature of music reviews. The first one was Pink Floyd. I had to do Pink Floyd.
Of course.
Sorry, it was all actually in response to our first review episode that we did with the Rush R40 tour. It was hugely popular. A bunch of people watched it. We had like over 300 some odd views on YouTube. It was insane. For us, for numbers anyway. That was I know it's like, we have 300 people. It's like, like some freaky kid's going to be out there with like an elf on a shelf in a week getting like 10 million views and sponsorship. But seriously, in response to that and in response to the popularity, we decided to sit down with musicians, engineers, recording engineers, and listen to new albums, new stuff that's coming out, and just review it, talk about it, talk about what moves us, because it is an industry where people are moved by their passions in this industry, I loved mixing jam bands for a year because that was my passion. Yeah. I loved it. I love jam bands. You can see I'm a deadhead, so while you're online, stop on by, check out those episodes. Check out Daniel Moore at the Sidewinder down on Red River in between 7th and 8th. And until next time, everybody, keep reaching for 11. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This is Talking Sound.